Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
Well, we've got three martinis today. Whether they're good or whether they're bad or whether they're crazy, there are definitely some crazy in here. And bad and good, potentially, depending on your political perspective. But what we know about the current sitting president of the United States is definitely not good. So we're going to go through Joe Biden's day yesterday in three different phases. First, we're going to talk about the special counsel report on his handling or mishandling of classified information. Then we'll talk about the press conference that Biden held last night. And then we'll talk about some of the aftermath of that. And so, Jim, yesterday, the big legal story was supposed to be the Supreme Court hearing whether or not Colorado could keep President Trump off the ballot. We still don't know that ruling yet, but based on the oral arguments, it seems like the Supreme Court's going to rule that he does need to stay on the ballot. But nonetheless, yesterday afternoon, first you see the headlines of special counsel says Biden will face no charges. And you're like, kind of saw that coming. But then the report actually got released, and the special counsel, Robert Hur, declared that Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified material, which sounds pretty bad, including allegedly even with his ghostwriter for a book. We'll get to that a little bit more in the second martini. But the more explosive situation was one of the main reasons why they're not pressing charges. And it's basically they don't think that he's mentally fit to stand trial. Here's part of the report. In his interview with our office, Mr. Biden's memory was worse. He did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended, and forgetting on the second day of the interview when his term began. He did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died, and his memory appeared hazy when describing the Afghanistan debate that was once so important to him. Among other things, he mistakenly said he had a, quote, real difference of opinion with General Carl Eikenberry when in fact Eikenberry was an ally whom Mr. Biden cited approvingly in his Thanksgiving memo to President Obama. In a case where the government must prove that Mr. Biden knew he had possession of the classified Afghanistan documents after the vice presidency and chose to keep those documents knowing he was violating the law, we expect that at trial his attorneys would emphasize these limitations in his recall. It goes on to say, quote, we have also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. It would be difficult to convince a jury that they should convict him, by then a former president well into his 80s, of a serious felony that requires a mental state of willfulness. So then you got the reaction from the White House, which was so tortured. On the one hand, they're thrilled that no charges are coming against their president, and so they're crowing about that. But at the same time, they have to denounce any suggestion that the president is not completely mentally sharp. There was allegedly an effort even before the report came out that White House attorneys tried to get the special counsel to change some of the lingo here, which would have gone over real well in the media if this had been a Republican administration. Jim Messina, who was a big part of the Obama-Biden campaign, says, let's be clear, the special counsel isn't a dummy, and we should be very careful not to take the bait after Comey pulled this in 2016. Hur, a lifelong Republican and creature of D.C., didn't have a case against Biden, but he knew exactly how his swipes could hurt Biden politically. And so there are some points in the special counsel's report where it says it doesn't rise to charges, but it's kind of confusing when you factor in the mental faculties there. So the Biden defenders at the White House find themselves in a difficult position, Jim, because if he is mentally competent, then perhaps he should be standing trial for what he did with the classified information. But by getting off the hook, you have to admit that he's not all there. So you're darned if you do and darned if you don't.
Greg, you just know that somewhere at Biden campaign headquarters this morning, they're sighing, they're banging their heads on the desk and saying, God, why couldn't he have just indicted him? That would have been easier. That would have been less damaging, you know. But we have, as of this recording, we have not yet seen a response from former President Trump. But I have a feeling we're going to get something. Hey, they think I'm competent to stand trial in 4 cases. Okay, that's not everybody can do that. Yeah, like for a couple of days, we'd seen reports that the Biden White House was concerned about this report, and I was kind of you really didn't see any scenario where Hur was going to recommend charges against Biden. DOJ policy is not to indict a sitting president. But you know, just you figured, okay, it's going to make him look bad. But, you know, and by the way, we would not be in this situation if Biden had not gone on 60 Minutes and said that he would never mishandle classified documents, that he took it very seriously, and he would never do anything like what Trump did. Now, does Trump have more documents? Yes, down at Mar-a-Lago. But it was it was a very inconvenient factor for Trump critics and for Biden that at a time when they're saying, oh my goodness, how could any president do this? Biden did it. Remember, they found 1 or 2 documents in Pence's papers. It sounds like it's not all that unusual for somebody to have a classified document. It gets shuffled in with the unclassified ones, and they end up taking it to their private office or something like that. Is there serious national security damage to that? No, but again, it looks bad, and it also looks bad when Biden insisted he would never do such a thing. That's why we needed a special counsel to dig into this. Well, Biden did answer questions under oath for about 2 days. The White House was quick to emphasize this was on October 8th and 9th, right after the Hamas attack to Israel. So the exculpatory spin from the White House is that he only is in a situation where he can't remember anything during a major foreign policy crisis. And I don't know about you, Greg, that made me feel better. That it's only when things are hard, that's when Biden can't remember anything. I believe the medical term is CRS, can't remember stuff, or some other term that starts with S there. It's really bad. My colleague, Phil Klein, was the first to post this to the corner. I'm reading this, and it was one of our listeners on Twitter. My apologies for not remembering which one. Pointed out that you and I have talked about this numerous times on this podcast, and I've said that when Biden's presidency ends, we're going to see a book by Bob Woodward or Bob Costa or somebody, and they're going to quote people who are going to say, yes, officially, they said, President Biden's health was fine, but behind the scenes, his staff had deep concern. They'll tell us, hey, yeah, Biden was in really rough shape his entire presidency. And none of us will be shocked because we have eyes, because we have ears. We see this guy going out talking with Francois Mitterrand and all of these other things that didn't happen and all the time. And we could just tell it's not just the shuffling the feet, the vacant stare, the claims that he's fallen asleep at public events, like all just things just point out to the fact that this is an 81-year-old man in rough shape. We remember what he looked like when he was vice president. We remember malarkey and that whatever you thought of Biden, he was at least fired up. He might be a pathological liar, but at least he was sharp in his lying, right? He was a much better liar back then. And now you just see it. You just see a guy who probably reminds a lot of people of aging parents or aging grandparents. I think almost every American has dealt with something like that, and they've seen someone's decline. And it's very sad and it's very frightening. And it's just something kind of like hilariously honest about her coming out and saying, there's no way I can get charges to stick to a guy like this. The jury is going to take one look at him and say, this poor old man, why are you picking on this guy? Of course he can't remember anything. And it was a very honest assessment. I don't buy this idea that he's some partisan hack who's out to destroy him. But even if he's completely if, as the White House insists, this is some sort of really unfair characterization of Biden's testimony, well, then let's see the transcript. Let's see the video. I'm sure all this stuff got recorded. Let's see it for ourselves. And if it's that bad, or if it's not what Hur described, well, then shame on you, Special Counsel Hur. But I don't see the White House doing that. And I operate on the theory that no one withholds exculpatory information. So I'm pretty darn sure Hur just, put in the report what was there. Hur probably, it's not hard to read between the lines that Hur thinks Biden is no longer in a state to be president of the United States. And I think the fact that Biden did what he never does, hold an event after 4 p.m., live on national television, taking questions, is a sign of how serious the White House recognized this assessment from Hur was. And as we'll discuss in that next martini, didn't really go as planned.
You're right about the reaction to this. You had seriously people who support Donald Trump saying, at least our guy's mentally fit to stand trial. And then the Biden people are like, well, even if he isn't all there, at least he's better than Donald Trump. I mean,
our guy's a mentally competent criminal. You guys can't say that.
Yeah, this is amazing, and we've got a lot more to say in the next martini. But the Biden defenders yesterday afternoon were in an absolute catch-22. You either admit that he can't do the job, or he ought to stand trial potentially. Our great sponsor for today is 4Patriots. Head to 4patriots.com/martini. That's where you can get your free solar panel when you purchase the Patriot Power Generator 2000X and get free shipping on orders over $97. The Patriot Power Generator is worth its weight in gold because it has double the capacity now, much better than the previous models even, and expandable so you can run the big appliances like your fridge even longer. 12 outlets, including 4 AC, 2 USB-C outlets so you can charge your phone 20 times faster than a regular plug. How good is that? Get also some last chance deal items while you can on the Patriot Pure items, UV phone sanitizer, UV wand, sanitation solution machine, and the disinfecting power bank. Visit 4patriots.com/martini to get your Patriot Power Generator 2000X with the free solar panel included. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. Save more and get peace of mind now by going to the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, well, if the special counsel report wasn't trouble enough for Joe Biden last night, he decided to do damage control, which only added to the damage. So we're going to talk maybe a little bit about the thinking behind that in the final martini. But Biden went out with a statement declaring his innocence and also, of course, showing indignation about any suggestion that he's not mentally competent for the job, especially over the allegation that he couldn't remember even within a few years what year his son Beau died. But then he had some other comments that only made the situation worse. First of all, as we just said, he willfully retained and willfully disclosed classified material, and Biden says that's just not true.
Not share classified information. I did not share it.
With your ghostwriter?
With my ghostwriter, I did not. Guarantee you did not.
But the special counsel said in the
no,
report
he
that he
did not say that.
Okay.
He did not say that.
But Mr. President,
Let me answer your question. The fact of the matter is, what I didn't want repeated, I didn't want him to know, and I didn't read it to him, was I had written a long memorandum to President Obama why we should not be in Afghanistan. And I was of this multiple pages. And so what I was referring to, I said classified. I should have said should be private because it was a contact between the president and the vice president as to what was going on. That's what it is referring to. It was not classified information in that document.
Well, that's not what the special counsel decided. And there's also reports that the ghostwriter did have it and actually deleted it, which is potentially more legal trouble, but apparently none is forthcoming. But then the question became, after his statement, do you take any responsibility for what happened with your handling of classified material? And if you were on the Biden staff shortly after he left the vice presidency, look out for that buzz.
Do you take responsibility for at least being careless with classified material?
I take responsibility for not having seen exactly what my staff was doing. It goes in and points out things that appeared in my garage, things that came out of my home, things that were moved not by me, but my staff.
You just didn't look at anything in your garage, had no idea what was in there. That's very odd. But then, to the horror of his own staff, Jim, he left the podium, got asked another question, and went back to the podium. And this is the big takeaway from the day on a couple of points. The question was about the Middle East, and here's what he had to say.
The conduct of the response in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially the president of Mexico, El-Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. I talked to Bibi to open the gate on the Israeli side.
And so we had one listener, Jim, who said, well, maybe that's the problem with our border. He thinks that El-Sisi is the president of Mexico. That's why it's wide open. But so you got two problems here. First of all, the whole point was to go out there and prove he was mentally competent. And then he claims El-Sisi, the president of Egypt, is the president of Mexico. And then he had some defenders saying, well, he masterfully handled the question. But he didn't, because half the people thought he was condemning Israel for being over the top, and half the people think he's condemning Hamas for being over the top and not being reasonable in negotiations. So whatever they set out to achieve yesterday was a massive failure.
Greg, my first thought is, are you picturing Egyptian President Sisi? Okay. Please hold for President Biden. We got to control that border. And, the migrants are coming over and you're doing nothing. And I'm getting all this grief in Texas. And Sisi just looking at the phone saying, what? Huh? I don't know if that's happened. Another thing that we don't know, but we can strongly suspect, people think, oh my God, who let him go out there? Whose idea was this? We don't know for certain, but it seems very likely that this was President Biden's idea himself. It's very hard to believe that he would go out and do this press conference if he didn't want to. And you could just see it in his body language and his entire attitude, this indignation. He's like, oh, I'm going to go out there. I'll show them. I'll show them I'm mentally competent. I'll show them that I'm still on the ball. I just want to point out, like, they announced this with very little warning. This came across, shortly after 7. 7 o'clock at night, I am tuned out of politics. I'm dealing with family stuff. I'm trying not, but like I saw this, I'm like, oh God, I better watch this. Like Biden never does prime time. He didn't do it when we were bombing the Houthis. He didn't do it when we were bombing sites in Iraq and Syria. Something big is up. Something really significant is going on, and it was, oh, trust me. They had to react to this special counsel. And again, in a week when you've referred to Mitterrand and you've referred to Angela Merkel as Helmut Kohl, who died in 2017, this is bad. I also think that Biden, whatever, I'm using this term loosely, charisma he may have once had, he's long since lost it. And when he thinks he's being fired up, he comes across as angry and defensive and irritable and a cranky old man. And there were several times in that exchange where, I think it was MJ Lee of CNN who had said, Mr. President, the American people, I have concerns about your age and your memory. And she said, you're saying that. Well, no, polling has indicated in numerous polls, lots of Americans, not just Republicans, plenty of independents, plenty of Democrats are concerned about the memory of an 81-year-old man who, I don't want to recite all of today's Morning Jolt, but after the Afghanistan debacle, right? That's when I really started hammering on this and saying something's wrong with the president. We just don't see him the way we would normally see a president. And I got all kinds of grief for that from people who should have known better. And then a few months later, Milley and several other generals said, yes, we recommended to the president that 2,500 troops remain in Afghanistan to help with the withdrawal, to help evacuate civilians, etc. Biden insisted in the Stephanopoulos interview that no one had ever said that to him. So the question is, was Biden lying? Always a possibility. Or did Biden genuinely not remember what he was told in those briefings, which I think is also a strong possibility. And that was 2 years ago. So now that we are about 81-year-old, I think it's extremely fair to ask, what does Biden remember after a briefing? And if anyone who's dealt with an aging parent or aging grandparent knows, those first 30 to 40 years, they remember that just fine. So that's why we're going to keep getting the stories about corn pop and, all that kind of stuff. It's the more recent 10, 20, 30 years that they don't remember nearly as well. And that's where we are with this. And I think that, Biden went out there trying to dispel the concerns that he's a crotchety old man who only reads off a teleprompter and that who can't be trusted speaking off the cuff. And he absolutely confirmed all of those suspicions.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's your judgment when they're, like you said, poll after poll. And so Nate Silver, that long-standing, staunch conservative, comes out with a poll showing, this is in January, so very recently, 76% of Americans have either major or moderate concerns about whether Joe Biden would have the necessary mental and physical health to be president for a second term, and 62% have major concerns. And so, and as he says, you can't get 75% of Americans to agree on almost anything these days. The fact that this many people see it is very, very telling. And that was the one way I think the question was prefaced well, is when she said, you have told the American people who are concerned about this, watch me. They are watching you.
Yeah,
they've already reached this conclusion.
Concerned.
Yes. There's still more to come on this, though. Hang on, everybody. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And it's interesting to watch the reaction to all this. A lot of people tweeting about the 25th Amendment. But until the Democrats decide that that's going to be the case, the media will try to probably make this a relatively short story and move on to other things. But maybe they can't. There's definitely some intensity in the questions last night. After a special counsel says you're not mentally competent, I think you pretty much have to focus on that. That was the reaction basically on the right. On the left, you had two different reactions. Number one was that this was the media at its very worst. I would say it was the media finally acting like they do with Republican president every single day. Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia, who I consider a friend, I've spoken with him, interviewed him many times, wrote a book many, many years ago called Feeding Frenzy. And so he did a picture of the cover of his book and says, like sharks in a feeding frenzy, do the journalists in that room understand how awful they looked? Your bloodlust was revolting. And then you had other people like Jonathan Chait saying, I think that was pretty good, actually. I think Biden acquitted himself really well, or something to that effect. And so my comment to Larry Sabato and then Tom Nichols, who basically echoed the president in saying that the question was based on a person's personal beliefs about Biden's aptitude instead of any snapshot of the American public, which obviously isn't true, as we just chronicled. It's just whistling past the graveyard here. I know these people don't like Trump, but there's a couple things here. First of all, it's obvious the guy is in serious decline. And secondly, if you want to blame anybody for what happened with the press last night, you got to blame the White House communications team. Usually Biden's out there with a card and even the faces, the pictures of people asking the questions, so they know what's coming. And they didn't do it that way. And he clearly wasn't ready for it.
You know, Greg, as for Larry Sabato's metaphor, sharks go into that feeding frenzy when they smell blood in the water. And so, like, that's an indicator that they felt like, one, there's a big story here. It's a story that, as we just discussed, is on Americans' minds. Is Biden still mentally and physically healthy enough and capable of performing the duties of the President of the United States? And as I said earlier this week, we already know he can't. Otherwise, he would be doing the nationally televised address to the country after striking the Houthis, after the second strikes in Iraq and Syria. He'd be doing the Super Bowl Sunday interview. He would be doing events, other than last night, before 10 a.m. or after 4 p.m. Like, we have all this evidence that the president is on a very limited schedule and only has a certain number of good hours in the day. Last night, we saw what happens when he's not in his good hours. That's a real story. You cannot begrudge the press for not doing that. Secondly, if Biden, if you feel like there was an excessive aggressiveness or whatever you want to characterize it in the questions asked of Biden yesterday, point out he never takes questions anymore. Certainly not in a formal press conference. The last formal press conference was in November at the APEC meeting in San Francisco. Right? It's early February. Last time he had a formal television interview was with 60 Minutes, and that was in October. Right? That's 4 or 5 months. Like, traditionally, presidents do these things all the time, and Biden doesn't do them. Why does he not do them? Well, the Biden team wants you to believe this is some sort of ingenious media strategy to hide him, and somehow when he appears, we're all going to be pleasantly surprised and love him. No, that's not it. If he could do it, he would be doing it. He's not doing it because he can't do it, and that's a very big story. And again, like, if you feel like there were too many questions being yelled at once, again, traditionally, if you have your list of if you held formal press conferences. And we've seen, by the way, that that time where it looked like Biden had the questions in advance. We don't even get those anymore. Why are we not getting them? My suspicion is because A, the staff doesn't trust him, and you never know when you're going to get 4 or 5 days ago, man, or you ain't black, or this man cannot remain in power. He just ad libs, goes very much off message, and creates some sort of headache that the rest of the White House has to undo. We remember the Jimmy Kimmel interview where he just started rambling about interracial couples that he sees in television commercials. I mean, he's a crotchety old man whose mind can go anywhere, and that's not a very effective state for the president of the United States. And the other thing, Larry Sabat, why are people so obsessed with Biden's age? Because he's running for re-election at 81. He turns 82 right after Election Day, and he wants to be in there for 4 more years. He wants to be in the job at age 86. Come on. That, we all know he's not, we're going to say he's not going to make it. I hope he lives to be 100. But I think we can all say, looking at his condition now, is extremely unlikely he would serve a second full term. Which means we should be having discussions about Kamala Harris. But, apparently if you say at some point we're going to have President Kamala Harris, that's some terrible sexist attack on Biden. What this is like an extended period of the White House insisting 2 + 2 = 5. And we're looking at it and we're saying it's 4. Or as Captain Picard would say, there are 4 lights.
Jim, if you were Jeff Zients, the chief of staff, Karine Jean-Pierre, whoever the communications director is now, when he left the podium and then came back, how high do you think the blood pressure was, and how many expletives do you think filled their heads?
Well, in today's New York Times, there is an anecdote of apparently early in his presidency, Biden did a press conference that went on for like nearly 2 hours, and Biden had some difficulties, as we probably recall. But at a subsequent meeting, Jill Biden, the first lady, came into the meeting and basically was like, why didn't somebody stop that? Which is, I know people think that anecdote is probably, oh, look at how much Jill Biden cares about her husband. No, look at how Jill Biden believes the job of the White House staff is to stop press conferences when they get bad because he can't handle it. because he gets tired after a while. Like, God forbid we go through a Cuban Missile Crisis or something where the president can't get a lot of sleep and, meetings all around the clock. And what's he going to do? You can't pause for the president to take a nap, or you can't say, he's really not feeling up to it today. Can we have the crisis tomorrow? And this is all separate from Trump. You can't just turn around and say, well, but Trump. Yeah, Trump's got his own flaws. Trump is only a few years younger than Biden is. But that doesn't get Biden off the hook. That doesn't, magically make Biden any younger. We're in the best of hands, Greg.
Was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago they sent the Easter Bunny to get him away from the press? I mean, this has been going on a long time.
Let's point out that somebody out there is saying, see, Jim and Greg can't even remember dates either.
Jim, quite an end to the week. We did not anticipate this. We also need to tell you that for only the fourth time in the history of the Three Martini Lunch, come Tuesday, we are going to have a guest who is not only a prominent figure in the political world on the right side of the aisle. It is our first ever female guest on the Three Martini Lunch. We have had female substitute hosts, but not any of the guests to go along with Bob Costas and Joe Lieberman and Governor John Sununu. So that's what we'll tell you for now. Might tell you a little more on Monday, but be ready on Tuesday for that special interview.
Our long history of sexism is coming to an end. And I also would point out, I was trying to remember, so we've only had those three. We've talked about our longtime listener and friend of the program, Tevi Troy, White House historian and very talented columnist. If we ever had him on, we would only want to talk Die Hard.
Yes.
We'd have absolutely no interest. He's an exceptional guy who knows everything about White House history, but we'd just be like, so when McLean ran across the broken glass, or was Hans Gruber's American accent really all that plausible? Or did McLean know the moment he heard him, it just didn't sound because that's what really matters on this program.
Why did he try to any other terrorist shoes on after he killed them? Only the first one.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
Tough questions that will linger forever. Jim, have a good weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the Three Martini Lunch if you don't already, and tell your friends to do it as well. We'd love to have them listening. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play Three Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great weekend, and join us again on Monday for the next Three Martini Lunch.